2011. Derek has worked on a broad spectrum of renewable generation technologies on projects throughout North America. Previously, Derek was Managing Director at Catalyst Renewables, overseeing project development and acquisition efforts on a variety of renewable energy technologies, including biomass power generation, landfill gas separation and power generation, and alternative fuels. He also worked at Reliant Energy as Manager of Renewables Development, overseeing the development of 6 renewable facilities. So could you please help me welcome Derek Benson and his panel on financing.
All right, well, let's get started with our second panel here real quick and turn the attention to our panelists. I'd like to introduce them real quick and try and get a little bit back on schedule since we're all that stands between you and lunch. Our first speaker will be Greg Aguilar. He's Vice President of Renewable Energy and Finance and Leasing for Rabobank, California Community Bank, and a division of the Rabobank Group. Greg joined in 2004 and helped form the bank's Renewable Energy Finance Department. Greg specializes in structuring financing solutions for commercial and utility scale renewable energy projects, and also manages the bank's equipment leasing program. Prior to Rabobank, Greg held various roles within business and corporate finance for Boeing and WellPoint Health Networks. Greg received a BA in Business Finance from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and an MBA from Pepperdine. And Greg is here to share Rabobank's commitment to finance projects in Imperial Valley and how it is geared up to be able to provide funding through its renewable energy lending division. Our second presenter is Brian Horenza. He's a Senior Vice President in charge of project finance activities at Hannon Armstrong Capital. Mr. Horenza has over 16 years extensive development and project finance experience in the energy sector. At Hannon Armstrong, he recently closed $313 million term financing for Hudson Ranch Power One. Prior to joining Hannon Armstrong, Horenza was Senior Director in the Corporate Strategy and Development Group at PG&E Corporation. There he was responsible for creating unregulated renewable energy investment strategy as well as assessing other investment opportunities. And prior to PG&E, Brian was Vice President Finance at Calpine Corporation. And Brian is here to discuss the creative, unique solutions and strategies implemented to secure the financing for Hudson Ranch Power One. Our third speaker is David Nahai. He's a leading expert in real estate, energy, and water matters. He's a partner at the law firm of Lewis, Brisbois, Bisgard, and Smith, and co-chair of its real estate, energy, and water practices. He is also the president of David Nahai Consulting Services, which advises clients in the renewable energy efficiency, and water energy sectors. Mr. Nahai is also the former general manager and commission president of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Mr. Nahai is the former chair of the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board, where he served in the administration of 3 California governors. He is credited with reinvigorating the effectiveness of the Water Board and spearheading some of its most aggressive programs, especially in the area of coastal protection. Mr. Nahai also sits on the boards of the California League of Conservation Voters, Heal the Bay, and the UCLA Luskin Center for Innovation. He has also served as a senior advisor to the Clinton Climate Initiative. David holds graduate and postgraduate degrees in law from London School of Economics, University of California at Berkeley, and was a visiting scholar at Berkeley. And David is here to provide an overview of the pitfalls and strategies that can be taken to secure financing. And our final panelist is Tony Taranto, a partner with Shepard Mullen in the real estate corporate and energy practice groups in the firm's San Diego and San Francisco offices. Tony specializes in real property, business, and energy transactions. Having previously worked in private equity and having been a corporate and real estate client, Mr. Toronto brings strong financial and business orientation to each engagement and advises clients across a wide range of complex transactional issues. He regularly counsels clients on the acquisition, disposition, development, financing, and leasing of real property. He also advises clients on general business, corporate, and transactional matters, from entity formation to complex contractual negotiations. He is a member of the firm's Climate, Energy, and Sustainability Group and advises energy clients on real estate, financing, and other transactional matters, including the negotiations of power purchase agreements. He is also an inventor on various patents. He has lectured and written on the areas of transactional due diligence, real estate development and finance, energy project development and finance, and power purchase agreements. Tony's here to discuss trends in project financing and strategies used to secure financing. So with that, I'll step aside and turn the floor over to Greg.
Thank you, Derek, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I initially attended this event a couple years ago, and it's pretty neat to see over the past couple years all the projects that are now actually in operation. And on behalf of Rabobank, I'm pleased to, or we're happy to not only be a sponsor of the event, but also, helping finance many of these projects ourselves. A little brief commercial on Rabobank. We are a privately held Dutch bank. We're a privately held Dutch bank, over 100 years of existence. We're a world leader in food and ag, and I'm proud to say that we're a AA rated bank with a strategic focus in renewable energy. Globally, we've helped finance billions of dollars worth of renewable energy projects for solar, wind, bioenergy, and we have an appetite to continue to do more. I'm part of the retail banking entity in California, of which we have a strong strategic presence here in Imperial Valley. I believe we have 8 retail branches and financial service centers. We are focused on long-term client relationships, and we do have a contingent of bankers here today. So if you do have questions regarding banking needs, please reach out to any of us. Regarding our renewable energy group, we have it broken down into 2 segments. One is client finance, and the other is project finance. Regarding our client financing, we have a solar loan and lease product, which is what we use to finance solar systems for businesses and municipalities. And we can tailor and customize the payments to make it ideally a cash flow neutral or positive situation for the client during the term of the loan. We also offer leasing for distribution centers and warehouses looking to retrofit their lighting into LED. On the project finance side, we offer construction and permanent debt for portfolios of DG and utility scale systems. Our sweet spot is up to $20 million and more on debt, and we focus on solar, wind, bioenergy, and geothermal. The panel is titled Financing Changing Times, so my presentation is going to touch upon the commercial side and also project finance. And on the commercial side, the traditional means to finance solar have been through the loan, the lease, and the PPA. On the loan side, that's been our bread and butter. That's what we've used to finance the majority of the client installations that we've completed. And those are it's a really good financing tool for clients that have a tax appetite, where they have the ability to monetize the investment tax credit and the depreciation. Like I mentioned earlier, we can customize the loan and payments to make it cash flow neutral or positive during the life of the loan, and it really becomes a no-brainer decision for the client. For clients that may not have the tax appetite, that's where a tax lease or a PPA may be the applicable structure for them. And for municipalities, we offer a tax-exempt lease product, which will enable them to potentially install a solar or renewable energy project. And depending on their credit rating, we could potentially go up long-term, maybe up to 15 years, including construction financing to help them install or finance the project. Where there's a big void in the marketplace, though, is for smaller scale commercial projects. particularly for clients that are seeking a lease or a PPA. And that's where creative new methods of financing are coming into place. And I mentioned two down below here. One is commercial PACE. PACE stands for Property Assessed for Clean Energy. And this is a way for a business can potentially install their solar system and make their payments to their property taxes. So in California, there's a few programs that have approved this commercial PACE program. One is called CalFirst. It was approved in September of 2012, and I believe there's about 140 cities and counties in California that are participating in this program. As a bank, we're actually doing our due diligence and getting a better understanding of how that program works to see if this could be something that the bank can participate in to help our clients open the doors up for more solar financing for our clients. Another new creative way is a concept called crowdfunding. We've seen this in other sectors, but it's becoming applicable for solar as well. And the concept is individual investors can invest money, which would be aggregated to help install and finance solar projects. And this could be a good way for smaller scale systems for nonprofits or for cities and communities to install a solar project. And an individual investor such as you or I can invest as little as $25 into this. And what's nice about these nonprofit and community type of smaller installs is you're investing your money into the community, and you're still getting a decent rate of return on that as well. And there's a company called Solar Mosaic that is implementing this crowdfunding concept that just started it recently. As you can see, that's a picture of our El Centro facility. Not only do we finance solar for our clients, but we also walk the talk and have installed solar on many of our own facilities. And this is an example of how one of our loan products in work. This project was implemented late in 2011 for 5 Crowns. Our Bill and Joe Collis was installed by Swinnerton, and we financed the project for them. On the project finance side, obviously you need debt and equity to get a project together. Just to give you some updates on the current environment. There's on the sponsor equity side, there's many investors entering the market looking for projects to buy, and there's interest not only in the development stage or in the operational stages, but also in the development stages. We're seeing with with reduction in the panel prices have obviously impacted the bottom lines of many solar manufacturers, and manufacturers that are vertically integrated have actually owned and implemented their own solar farms that are looking for liquidity and are putting these projects for sale. So these could be good investments or long-term investments for investors, and we're seeing more and more of these projects for sale. Where we could come into play is providing the debt. Due to the European crisis and the uncertainty on long-term, the stickiness of long-term deposits, what we're seeing now in the marketplace on at least the bank debt side is mini perms, which are 5 to 10 year balloons with the longer amortizations underneath. That allows for the bank to potentially get out after the balloon or accelerate payments. But the good news on the debt side, though, is we're still at historical lows as far as interest rates, and there's no better timing to lock in a long-term rate than now. And from the tax equity perspective, tax equity continues to remain scarce and unavailable for many projects, which means you're looking at quality projects, and as a developer, you really want to make sure you put together a project that stands above the rest. That kind of leads me into my next slide, which is de-risking your project. As project finance lenders, what do we look at when we get a project to finance? The first, when you look at the system itself, is we want to see proven technology. Banks are conservative by nature, and we want to make sure that the technology that we're going to be financing, that there's a track record behind. We also want to make sure that the parties involved, from the warranty standpoint, that the manufacturers and the EPC have strong balance sheets. From the EPC perspective, they need to have the bonding capacity and the ability to potentially to provide performance guarantees, and from the manufacturers, the ability to honor the warranties associated with the projects. So not only are we looking at, from the top tier manufacturers from the technology side, but we also look at the balance sheet as well. Regarding the offtake agreements, we want to see investment grade offtakes, typically fixed price contracts that are longer than the capital commitment, meaning that if it's a 15-year contract, you're looking at a tenor on the financing of maybe up to 12 years. So there's a tail at the end in case the power didn't come up to expectations. There's still enough to cover the term debt. On the debt side, obviously we're looking for good economics, a strong debt to service coverage ratio. The higher debt to service coverage ratio, the stronger the project. For us within Rabobank, we're looking at opportunities between $25 to $100 million is our sweet spot. And from the participants, experienced parties are key for us. If you're a new developer looking at a new technology, then align yourselves with experience, technology that has been proven, with a EPC that has a proven track record, and align yourself with experienced parties if you're new to the field. One thing I should mention too on the offtake agreement that's similar to that is on bioenergy is feedstock. We're also going to want to see feedstock agreements that typically match the tenor of the financing as well. And like I mentioned, we've been involved in financing several projects. This is the Centinela project, the ribbon cutting ceremony for this project several months ago. And like I mentioned, the bank has a big appetite and looking to do more business, and particularly here in the Imperial Valley. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Let's move right now over to Mr. Brian Horenza with Hannon Armstrong.
Good morning. Winston Churchill was at a charity event in London, and one of the Labour MPs came up to him and said, "Sir, you are drunk." And he said, "Madam, you are very ugly, and in the morning I will be sober, but you will still be ugly." I'm here to talk about financing geothermal power projects, which some consider to be the ugly sister of the renewables. So first, a little blip on Hannon Armstrong. We're a 30-year-old investment bank, boutique investment bank. We have offices in Maryland and in Sonoma, California. We finance projects all across the country. We particularly are interested in energy efficiency, geothermal, solar, and wind. We split the business into three sections: structured finance, investment banking, and merchant banking. Let's get down to it. At Hannon, my experience and Hannon's experience has been mostly involved around Hudson Ranch Power One. We arranged some resource verification in 2007, a facility. We also did the construction financing. We arranged it, we structured it. It's $300 million, a syndicate of 8 commercial lenders. It was the first utility scale triple flash plant construction financing done in probably about 20 years in California, maybe even in the US. It won the 2010 Geothermal Deal of the Year. Granted, it was the only geothermal deal in 2010, but we'll take the award anyway. We also have, in addition to that, we've arranged the private placement. We took out the construction debt last year, a $313 million private placement with some insurance companies. We also raised $99 million in tax equity from a strategic sponsor. Why are there not more geothermal projects financed? And Greg and I kind of got together and worked through our slides. I think we're looking for the exact same things. I'd say the first is the prolific and verifiable resource. The Salton Sea area is the best resource in the country. I used to work at Calpine, and then when I worked there, I said the geysers was the best geothermal resource in the country, so take that for a grain of salt. But we're also looking for strong major project contracts. I'm talking about offtake, water supply, construction agreements, a seasoned project management team, and as well as in geothermal, it's even more important because there's very few qualified people out there in the industry. Development and resource verification drilling costs. This is a big issue for geothermal because by definition, drilling and resource verification is an equity risk. Most lenders do not want to finance that, so you have to have the ability to either fund it yourself or obtain external financing. And lastly, incentives. The incentive scheme changes constantly. No one knows what's going on, and for geothermal, with its high capital costs, it makes it extremely challenging to plan ahead. Oh, there it is. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. Oh well, the two were kind of the same. It's sort of the one was all the same topics, and this is what you need, and the other one is why this isn't being done. So I've pretty much walked through this. I'm completely open to any questions you may have, and I'm trying to get us back on time. That's the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Next, we'll hear from David Nahai.
See, that's one of the reasons I prefer not to use a PowerPoint. So this way I can just talk to you and the button won't be quick. But first of all, thank you all so much for being here. And I really want to thank the IVEDC for putting on a panel about project finance. You know, this is a pretty dry area, and I think that's evidenced by the stampede out of the room that we saw as soon as somebody said this panel is going to be about project finance. But you know what? It's the money. It's the money that keeps the developers operating, that builds the projects, and which produces the power. So this is an indispensable part of this entire equation. I want to take just a minute and acknowledge some people who are here from my law firm, the Lewis Brisbois law firm, and I'm going to embarrass them by pointing them out. Back there, looking very handsome and professorial, is Stan Snyder, and over here are my partners Claire Collins and Kelly Black. So if you have any questions arising out of this talk, please ask them. Good. I think we've got an audience that's at least a little bit awake. So okay, I'm going to talk about, you know, really the basics of project finance. And I said this is not really an area that we look into, but with the disappearance of the 1603 grant program, the 1703 program, the 1705 program, with the near death of the wind PTCs and its rescue at the last moment in the fiscal cliff deal, it's really high time that we shed a lot more light on the finance part of the renewable energy industry. And I mean, it's truly important because with the Great Recession, we saw really the disappearance, I think, of private project financing. And had it not been for the government's interference in this arena, I shudder to think what would have happened. Just think, the 1603 program pumped into the renewable energy industry something like, I think, $9.8 billion. That, in turn, catalyzed, in terms of private investment, something like another 22 billion. It helped bring to life something like 4,250 projects. So I think what the government did during the period of the recession was truly crucial to keeping the renewable industry going. But those days are over, and it's time now for the private finance industry to re-enter the picture, and we're seeing, I think, a lot of the signs of life for that, but it's really still not enough. And the question that I think we now have to pose to ourselves, in addition to stimulating additional demand, and I think, you know, seriously thinking about going beyond 33% to 40% here in the state of California is very much a part of that. But the other part of it is this: we keep talking about bringing down the cost of technology. And it has come down. What we haven't concentrated on is how to bring down the cost of financing, how to make it more available and more accessible. because that too will help bring down the overall cost of the final product, which is the renewable fuel. So what does financing in this area look like? So just going back to basics, it basically falls under, I think, 3 headings. We have direct equity, tax equity, and project finance. Direct equity is all you all know, is private equity investment. And what are the private equity people looking for? It's always 5 things, right? It's invariably these 5 things dominate. The experience of the team, the viability of the technology, the revenues in the past, realistic projections for the future, and most importantly, the exit. You know, I think developers and the recipients of private equity money don't ever want to talk about the exit. But no one's going to get very far with the private equity industry unless the exit on a 5 to 7 year kind of time frame, whether it's doing a public offering or selling the company, that becomes of paramount importance to them. And Derek and I were talking about Energy Source and where Energy Source's money has come from over the years, and he said, well, it's private equity, it's mezzanine, it's project finance, it's all of these things. Next, I want to talk a little bit about tax equity. You know, we have a tax equity market, such as it is. I mean, it's just beginning to, I think, really revive. And we're seeing companies like Google come into the tax equity market now with over a $700 million investment. But the tax equity market exists because of federal programs which use tax incentives as a way of stimulating development in the renewable energy industry. But it's highly inefficient because the basic premise of this is that the renewable energy industry really isn't going to pay a lot of taxes for various reasons and can't take advantage of the tax breaks. And therefore, an entity which is going to face a huge tax bill is brought in order to take advantage of those tax breaks. So this has become a kind of really a capital formation vehicle. But it isn't anywhere near as efficient as a direct program such as the 1603 program. And in doing this, we've come up with, you know, these structures that are tortured in many ways, highly complex, and in my opinion, quite inefficient. But as long as we have tax incentives helping to drive this market, the tax equity partner becomes an essential part of the equation. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the structures, right? The first one is a sale-leaseback. And under a sale-leaseback, the developer basically sells the project to the tax equity partner. The tax equity partner infuses the capital, is able then to take advantage of the tax incentives until a certain point arrives where the tax equity's partner has received its benefit of the bargain, and at that point, the developer gets the ability to buy back the project. But these have to be what are called by the IRS true leases, right? Because under certain circumstances, they can be characterized as disguised security transactions. But the IRS has put out guidelines for what constitutes a true lease, and one has to make sure that one comes within that definition. Another structure is called the partnership flip, okay? Now, I don't want you to have your minds go all over the place as to what a partnership flip is. I know some people that I would like to give a partnership flip to, but that's not the kind of flip that we're talking about here. What we're talking about is the kind of arrangement under which the tax equity partner and the developer actually become partners. And for a while, the tax benefits are allocated to the tax equity partner until, again, the benefit of the bargain is reached, at which time there is a flip. I think they should call it a partnership change rather than a partnership flip, but who am I to say? So that's and then there are kind of variations of this all over the place. So that's tax equity deals. That brings us to project finance. And I think Greg and Brian were both talking really about project finance. And this is asset-based financing. This is putting up the asset rather like a real estate asset as security for the loan. So, and this runs the gamut. There's construction, bridge, term, mezzanine. Some municipal utilities, such as my former agency, the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, have actually come up with a prepay deal as well, in which the utility, using its very low cost of funds, actually funds the build-out of the project and then gets an option to own it once it's built out and once the tax benefits have been exhausted. Now, in going through this, everybody keeps thinking that if you have a PPA from a creditworthy off-taker, that means that you have a financeable project. That is just not true anymore. Having an assured revenue stream in and of itself is not going to be enough any longer to satisfy Brian and Greg to make the loan. A great deal depends on what kinds of provisions are contained in the PPA, in the EPC contract, in the lease for the land, and really professionals are needed to advise developers right off the bat as to what kinds of provisions are going to be acceptable if they're put in the lease, in the EPC contract, and in the PPA. Now there are, in the IOU world, we have largely standardized PPAs. In the POU world, I think we still have a bit of a work in progress. For instance, the latest PPA from SCAPA has in it a change of law clause. And a change of law clause basically says that if sometime in the future the legislature decides to retroactively change the classification of a power, in other words, now today it's bucket 1, in the future it is reclassified and all of a sudden becomes bucket 3, then the utility gets various rights to now classify it as brown power and in some instances to cancel the PPA altogether. Well, that is not going to be something that a lender is going to find particularly welcome. And so these negotiations have to take place to make sure that the PPA is put in a shape that a lender is going to take a look at it and like not only the assured revenue stream, but all of the provisions that are in there. And we sometimes get into conflict situations because you have the landlord who wants to be able to evict the developer tenant if there's a default under the lease and own the project. You've got the utilities such as LADWP, which is in LADWP's case, a vertically structured utility which wants to own its project and has an option to purchase that particular project, which it can trigger in the event there is a default under its PPA. And you have the lender, of course, which definitely wants to be able to foreclose on the project if there's a default. And so the question becomes, which one of these interests is going to prevail if the project goes south? I can tell you in every circumstance, the money will trump, right? The money comes first, and therefore the lender has the strongest hand in dictating what will happen. But these are conflicts that need to be looked at ahead of time, at the time that the EPC is entered into, at the time the PPA is entered into, at the time that lease, which gives the developer site control, is entered into. I'm going to finish with just a couple more thoughts. As I said earlier, the problem that we have in the finance world is that we've got very few players who are tax equity. You can count them, I think, on the fingers of both hands. Many of them are foreign banks who are not here doing that. And we now have, I think, in addition to stimulating more demand by expanding the RPS and doing other things at the state and local level, we have to make project finance more accessible. And one of the things that we have to do is to come up with new structures. And there are some that are available. They're tried, tested, true, very old. They're just not available to the renewable energy industry. And I'm talking about master limited partnerships and real estate investment trusts. Master limited partnerships have been used by the fossil fuel industry now for decades. This is a structure which functions as a corporation, giving limited liability to the people who invest in it, but is treated as a partnership for tax purposes. Right? And that combination has enabled the fossil fuel industry, as well as many other industries, to raise a great deal of money. But the statute which sets up the Master Limited Partnership restricts it to really fossil fuels. It's high time that that door was open to the renewable energy industry as well. And there is actually a law going through Congress, as if anything can get through Congress these days, which is called the Master Limited Partnership Parity Act. And the renewable energy industry needs to organize to support the passage of that law. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. Next up, we'll hear from our last speaker, Tony Taranto.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the invitation to be here today, and thank you also to my esteemed panelists, colleagues over here, and for the introduction. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces and also quite a few new ones. And I am Tony Taranto, as was said, so I'm here from Sheppard Mullin. I chair our energy group, and I'm going to be discussing, of course, financing in changing times. I'm going to start with a little bit of an introduction about our firm, and then we'll talk about trying to introduce a little bit of humor into it. How is it that you actually can successfully get your project financing across the finish line? I've organized that a little bit like a David Letterman top 10 list. We'll see if you think it's funny or not. Probably not, but we do our best. So, about our firm. So, Sheppard Mullin, my firm, we're a full-service firm. We have over 600 lawyers, been around an awfully long time. We represent a lot of large companies and have 16 offices around the world. We've received a lot of great awards, which is terrific, including awards in real estate, awards with respect to our environmental practices, and lots of awards for recognition generally about as rankings in law firms and things go. I'm also very pleased to be joined here by two of my very esteemed colleagues who many of you know because they do a lot of work here in Imperial. And in particular, my partner, Jeff Forrest, if you could raise your hand. And then also John Ponder, hopefully not putting you to sleep back there. So when it comes to land use and permitting matters, these two are really the best. So I encourage you to go up and introduce yourself to them. They're certainly very happy to share with you more information about our firm. So in our energy practice, there are a bunch of different pieces of this. It's kind of interesting and unique when it comes to the kinds of services that David and I provide, in that providing an energy practice is a highly interdisciplinary one. It involves financing and the money part of it, which is a big part of what I do. Also real estate, entitlements, and the sort of things for permitting that John and Jeff does. Also the negotiation of power purchase agreements, the construction side, the EPC. It's very tax intensive, speaking to the issues of tax equity investors, for example, like David was talking about before. And you also have all of the traditional corporate and then the regulatory overlay that applies to all of it. So it's a highly interdisciplinary thing to do. We do and have done transactions, project financings, over $5 billion in them. And in projects ranging from very small projects, around $1 million or so, to projects of over $1 billion, projects under 1 megawatt to gigawatt projects. So there's a very wide range that you see, particularly as you look at solar, the DG on the one side and the mega projects on the other side. But a lot of the things that you see, particularly on the large projects, are directly translatable over to all sorts of other fuel sources. So, top 10 list. So number 10, this is avoid broken priority issues whenever possible. I'm not sure how many of you know or have experience with this, but this relates to if you commence construction on a project before your project financing is actually in place, that is to say, before your deed of trust is recorded, for example, all of the mechanics and material men on that project have lien priority over your lender. And so it creates enormous headaches. Please avoid it if you possibly can. There are some ways to structure around it. I'd be happy to talk about that if you have questions in more detail, but really, this can throw a monkey in the works, a monkey wrench in the works that you'd really much rather avoid. Number two, good reputable contractor. So this one says, there goes another one. A lot of turnover this month. To the extent that you vet your EPC contractor and you can avoid problems in the process, of course, you'll find that to be all the better. This not only prevents mechanics liens, but those issues and disputes also tie back very much to your financiers, and they don't want these problems either. Number 8, third-party consents, these pesky things. So this was supposed to be a mother-in-law. I'm not quite sure if it is, but when you do get your financing in place, or as you are trying to get it in place, you will need to get consents with respect to many of your third-party contracts, particularly your major ones. And as one of my lender friends says, that is the long pole in the tent. And so you can often find that that not only takes a great deal of time, but you can find those folks to be persnickety. So I would suggest, again, that you start that process early to the extent you can. Make sure that you've provided and anticipated the need for those consents, because it will come up. Number 7, preempt the big issues. So if there is a toxic portion of your site, if you are building on a landfill as an example, you know it's going to come up. There are going to be lots of questions related to that. You can turn that whole issue into a very short issue, small conversation, and dispense with it by preparing in advance and knowing about it and really addressing it up front before your lenders get involved. Or you can let them find issues as they dig into it, and perhaps as they're conducting their diligence, and really create a lot of headaches and problems for yourself. Focus on the major documents. This is keep your eye on the ball. There was a conversation about this before that David was talking about your lenders, as they conduct due diligence, they will look and read all of your major documents. They will focus on those. They will look at every jot and tittle. They will look at the different clauses. They will look at issues that relate to any possible out that your off-taker under the PPA could have. They'll look at curtailment clauses. They'll look at everything. And in connection with those, on the major documents, don't take your eye off the ball. Really be very careful about that, because it doesn't just have to pass your muster, it has to pass the muster of your financing parties. That, by the way, applies not only to your lender on the debt side, but it will apply to your tax equity investor too. And in many cases, the two will team up in doing their diligence. Be organized. So I can say this from the lender's perspective. When I represent a lender in a project financing, it is incredibly inefficient when the lender has to ask for and wait for a bunch of different documents to be assembled or compiled. If you are trying to, in these difficult times, do your financing, and these transactions can become very, very expensive, the best favor that you can do for yourself is to be very organized and disciplined about it. It makes it a lot better for you, for your counsel on your side, of course for your financiers and for their counsel. And since the project developers are usually paying everybody's legal bill, it makes it a lot better and a lot more efficient. Next, I'll say similar issue, use checklist. This one says, nurse, get on the internet, go to surgery.com, scroll down and click on the "Are you totally lost?" icon. So, again, by being disciplined in the process when you're doing your financing up front, identifying what you need, and then in connection with that, working through that systematically, that will help avoid surprises later on in the game. Use experienced counsel. Of course, this is self-serving, but it's true. Susie, this is the math, not the law. When we work with counterparties that really do know what they're doing, it obviously makes things go a lot faster. On each side, I know what my counterpart, if I'm representing the developer or sponsor, I know what the lender and their counsel is going to look for. Similarly, when I'm on the lender side, the borrower will know also, and it's reciprocal. So the more you do have those established, experienced representatives, the easier it's going to be for you to move through that process efficiently. So next, and this is also related, what you want to be able to do for your pipeline is establish a template. This is lather, rinse, repeat. You don't want this every time to be your first rodeo, right? You want to be able to do it once and then repeat it and do it again and again and again. The first one will be the least efficient financing process. Each one should be an increasingly more efficient financing process, which actually goes to the next part, which is long-term relationships. So I think that to the extent you have great banking relationships, to the extent you have great tax equity relationships, especially in this market, lenders and tax equity investors have their pick of the litter. Tax equity is rare, so it goes to the best deals. If you get tax equity investors are looking for long-term repeat relationships. They want to know that it's not a one-off process, but that you can do it again and again and again. You need to cultivate those relationships, and every time you do it, it will make the next transaction that much easier. But if you are developing a pipeline, if you're thinking long-term, you're going to make it much more likely, in fact, that those players are going to want to invite you to the dance. So, there you go with your top 10 list. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
All right, we managed as a panel, I think, to get about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So if you do have any questions, I think we'll still take those. We did manage to pick up a couple along the way. So I guess with about 4 minutes to lunch, we'll take a couple here real quick. One here that we do have, and I think there's been a lot of focus now on tax equity, and David, you were particularly highlighted some of the inefficiencies that we have there. Our first question is related, so to any of the panel members, how can we connect tax equity needs with high net worth investors, which is a somewhat related question. It clearly goes a little bit different than, say, some of the large, Fortune 500 companies that are the primary ones, but how do you connect them with high net worth individuals? Is there anyone?
I don't know. Okay. Whoa. I think it's largely a matter of I don't want to use the word education, but I think it's largely a matter of that. Tax equity investing is I think a very specialized field, and this is why we only have a handful of institutional investors that have actually gone into it. And let's also not remember that the industry all but disappeared back in 2008 and is now just coming back into, I think, some level of activity. I think with entities like Google coming into this and investing money, and others seeing the opportunities in the renewable energy market, we're going to see, I think, family offices, high net worth individuals. That's also up here we didn't talk about syndicated approaches between banks. We didn't talk about club funding, when a number of banks would get together as a club and do this. And there will be opportunities there for high net worth individuals and family offices and others to go in as well. But I think we also need to continue to stimulate the market. The thing that some of us are seeing is that we've created this wonderful, vibrant industry with the 33% RPS, and it's created thousands of jobs, not just of developers, but engineers and land surveyors and lawyers and consultants, and I don't think that it's advisable for us to say, fine, we got to 33% and we're going to stop there. We have to look beyond that. And with that kind of stimulant, with that kind of encouragement and support, I believe we'll see others come into the market and not just these handful of financial institutions. I don't know if...
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I have... May I borrow yours? Sure. Thank you. Thank you, David. I agree entirely with David on the issue of education, the educational curve that it takes to get high net worth individuals comfortable making a tax equity investment. I would point out, though, that the primary tax equity investors, actually, if you are going to try and count them on your fingers and toes, they're almost entirely, until very recently, and still almost entirely comprised of banks and financial institutions. You do have some corporates Google being a terrific example, that have more recently entered the market. But I can tell you from some personal experience where we've worked on deals here, the amount of brain damage that goes into bringing high net worth individuals and private investors up to speed on these is quite high. There's a lot of brain damage associated with that. And I would say in that respect, I wouldn't be terribly optimistic about being able to bring high net worth individuals in as your tax equity investors, but for one thing that I think may change the game. And it's frankly supply and demand. It's going to be basic economics. There is tremendous scarcity among the traditional players for tax equity, with the consequence being that yields actually for tax equity investors are quite high. And when you have yields that go as high as we've seen them recently, I was talking to a fellow yesterday about a tax equity fund, and in connection with them, they're talking about returns perhaps in the high teens. When you talk about really juiced returns associated with them, I think then you start to pique a lot of interest. So I think that the opportunities to actually, because there is so much scarcity, you're starting to see activity where people are trying to actually enter the market and find other tax equity investors. That may bring other corporates, it may bring family offices and high net worth individuals, but there's a lot of brain damage between here and there. Hopefully yields can help overcome it.
Okay. One more question. I think want to get out on the table in terms of Tony, you raised a lot of questions or highlighted a lot of points in terms of the development process and where some pitfalls are. But I think it highlights, where developers are in terms of, generally keeping their nose to the grindstone and doing a lot of the blocking and tackling. Are there issues on a macro level that maybe in banking industry, some of the policy that Jonathan mentioned earlier, there's some of the things that are on the horizon that we should be factoring in now that currently aren't in the sort of school of thought in terms of development? Anybody wants?
From the banking side, Rabobank, we're strictly a debt player in this market, but with the European crisis, that's on the minds of us being a foreign parent. And one of the things that I mentioned on my presentation about what we've changed on the debt side is doing mini perms, and that goes along to just uncertainty in the long term, and also the stickiness of our deposits. We're fine on the short term, but on the long term, there's more uncertainty there. So as far as how we've structured our debt, it's changed from, instead of doing a 15-year fully amortized deal, we've now changed it to more 5 to 10-year terms with the longer amortization underneath, to allow us more flexibility when that balloon happens to either get out, accelerate payments, what have you. So what's going on in Europe right now does cause some uncertainty with the global economics of banks. So.
I would also just add that with the banks kind of pulling back, it opens up the opportunity for other investors to step in. So we're seeing a lot of that on the institutional side, a lot of life insurance companies, hedge funds, the term loan B type players as they're called, can be some family offices and whatnot, are stepping into the fold. So you're seeing the demand in the banking side being picked up by others. So I think where there's distress, there's always opportunity. So I think there's certainly money to be made for everybody. I think that, again, if you have a project and you're looking for financing, it's out there. You might have to look a lot harder than you used to, and you might have to take some terms that you don't exactly want, but it's certainly there.
All right, with that, I think we'll wrap up, and so let's give a round of applause for our panel. Thanks.
Okay, everybody, we get to break for lunch in just a couple of minutes. They're setting up. We have a buffet on both sides. Lunch is sponsored today by Tenasca Solar Ventures, so let's give them an applause for sponsoring this. We have a keynote speaker in Andy Horn a little bit later, but we'll go ahead and let you break and get your food if they are ready here. And so just remember, you have both sides of the room. I want to say thank you to the two panels this morning and all the speakers, and thank you for your patience. We ran a little bit long, and so they brought us back to time, so thank you very much. And we'll talk to you in a little bit.